Okay. We are live. Live. Just waiting for. Oh, interesting. So I'm using a beta of Ecamm Live this time. It's not always the best thing to do when you're doing production work, but I've decided to use a beta and see how well this new Ecamm Live version 4, beta 16, which was just released last week, I believe. This is the one I'm using today. I had beta 15 installed, but when Eric and I had all the troubles connecting up and all that stuff a couple weeks ago. This is a bonus episode, by the way. We didn't get one in due to family things going on, the holidays, trips, stuff like that. And this is going to be our bonus episode. The one episode in November. We're getting it out just in the nick of time, just before the end of the month. And anyway, so I'm using this beta. I had beta 15 installed before. Decided not to use it last time because of all the other troubles we're having. But this time, I'm using it. So we're going to see how well this works. We're still only live streaming to YouTube. We're not going anywhere else. This is the only place you are going to see. Eric is joining us now. Guest 1. Let's see if I can pull Eric in.
Okay, go ahead. What?
Okay, go ahead. Okay.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I'm good. I'm good now.
All right. Awesome.
How you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Oh, shoot. What the heck? You know what? You just did the little fade out thing and then came back.
Am I back now?
Are you there?
Am I there?
You are back now.
Are we due for
you are there. It's a little stuttery.
2 hours of hell?
2 hours of hell. 2 hours of pure hell. I love the hat.
Thank you. Yes. That's my cool. 80s, my neon 80s Macstock hat. We got the neon pink and the neon blue like and the neon green. Yeah.
Yep. I meant to ask you, have you been watching Andor?
No, not yet.
That is really good. It's definitely worth it.
Yeah, I'd like to. I would like to, but others in the household have decided that it's not priority at the moment.
You got to get yourself your own TV.
So going back to what you're saying, I'm watching the stats here, and we're doing good. I mean, we've got a required bandwidth of 3 megabits per second. We're meeting that. We've got we're not topping 4 anywhere. So
we should be good.
Yeah, we should be good, or at least on this end we're good. I'm not sure why we are having so many problems.
Well, I think on my end, I think the trouble starts if I accidentally click out of Chrome. Like, even if I just accidentally click on the Finder desktop, it, for some reason, doesn't like that. And then that's when the trouble starts. And it's hard for me to explain, but the audio goes first. It's like the audio it's like everything slows down to crawl. And it's really weird. It's like, the scene in The Matrix where he takes the red pill or whatever, and you kind of see him going down the phone. He goes, it kind of makes that noise. That's the noise that it's making. It's like really, it would be cool otherwise, just not with this.
It's not with this. Should I tell you that The Matrix is something I've never seen either?
Oh, geez, really?
Never seen it.
No kidding, really?
Never seen it. I've never seen Jaws. I've never seen Gone with the Wind. I've never seen what's the other one that everyone's seen, but I haven't. Oh, with Bruce Willis ghost movie. What? The one where, oh, he was a ghost
Die
the
Hard?
whole time? I can't remember what that was called.
Oh, Sixth Sense. Sixth
Sixth
Sense.
Sense.
Yep.
Never seen
Yeah.
Sixth Sense. Say that 10 times
Yeah.
fast.
Sixth Sense. No kidding. I what was I gonna say? I haven't seen Gone with the Wind really either. That's like a 4-hour movie though. I know Emma just watched it. My mom kind of and her watched it, and Emma did not care for Scarlett. She thought she was spoiled and whatever.
Maybe
I do like. I haven't
she
seen Gone with
should
the Wind either, but I
go ahead.
go ahead.
Oh,
I was
I
gonna
was
say it, but I do
yeah.
love the Carol Burnett skit where she puts the curtains on. That
Yes.
is so awesome.
Yes. That is what I was literally just gonna say. I said maybe she should watch the Carol Burnett version of Gone with the
Yeah.
Wind instead, and she'll like that a lot better.
Yeah.
That's exactly
I know,
what
that
I was
is
just gonna
awesome.
say. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So we're doing.
Anyway,
So
what I was going to say with,
I thought you had tried
ahead.
Safari last time, and that worked better.
You know what? Maybe I should try Safari. Should I just give that a shot and then see? Because the picture is moving okay, but the audio is kind of weird.
See, and you're coming through
And
okay on this end.
yeah, and actually, I can make out what you're saying for the most part, but it's just a little broken up.
All right. Well,
Uh,
your call.
okay, let me give it a shot. I'm going to quit Chrome and I'll try it on Safari.
Okay. No, I'm not frozen. All right. Well, once again, I have to leave notes for myself because once again, gosh darn it, I forgot to click record on my pod track over here before we went live. Of course, all this is being recorded. Ecamm does a really, really good job of recording everything that's going on. In fact, this new beta will record individual tracks to make podcast editing easier and things like that. But I prefer the sound quality of what gets recorded on the Zoom. So I prefer to hit record over there or get the audio recording over there. And gosh darn it, if I didn't forget to hit record again. It's recording now though. It's recording now as we wait for Mr. Erickson to rejoin us from Safari this time instead of Chrome. I think people should just give up using Chrome. Just stop using Chrome. You know, at one time that was our mantra. Stop using Internet Explorer. Stop using this. Stop using that. Start using Chrome. It's lightweight. It's low resources. Well, it is everything that we rallied against back when we started suggesting Chrome as a primary browser. And now people are locked into this habit of using Chrome all the time. And quite frankly, I'd say use Firefox or Safari. Just give up using Chrome. If you need a Chromium browser, there's Opera, there's Edge, each of which has its own issues, but there's Opera, there's Edge, there's Eric.
Sounding good. You sound good.
Could you hear me? You could hear me?
Yeah.
You
Yep.
could hear what I was saying? How
Well,
could
you just
hear-
heard you say there is, but that's it.
Oh, I was going through and just telling people to stop using Chrome. Basically. We're live. I have to entertain the crowd. So
The crowd,
I was
while-
saying just stop using Chrome.
Stop using Chrome altogether.
There was a time where where we were recommending Chrome. It was the lightweight
Yep.
go-to browser, but it has become everything that we were telling people to avoid.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's had how many emergency fixes now?
8, 9,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think. Yeah, it was 8 or 9. I just saw. And look, Safari's not perfect. Firefox isn't perfect. They each have zero-day
no,
flaws from time to time, and they get patched. But
right.
it's like trusting your passwords to what's their name? The one that folks use instead of 1Password, the
Oh,
web-based one.
LastPass or
LastPass.
Dash?
It's
Yeah,
like trusting your passwords to LastPass.
yeah,
No. Look how many times in the past few years they've had security breaches. Now, granted,
yeah,
your data has been safe, or so they tell us it's been safe. But come on, you
yeah.
you you're telling us you want us to keep our entire life's passwords and other security information
Right.
in your system, and you have all these issues.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's just not worth it.
It's not worth it.
Yeah. No, it's just unbelievable, actually, and it's so funny how Chrome has come full circle. It's almost it is like Internet Explorer before. I mean, it's I can't almost believe it, in a way, because I for some reason, you could see Microsoft, you could kind of see how that happened, and they got huge and it was everywhere, and then eventually they just kind of did keep updating it. Everything else, but like with Google and Chrome, I just kind of figured that was a natural thing. It would always be on the be Chrome would always be whatever.
I'm losing you again. We started out good. I'm not seeing anything in the stats indicating a problem. And there he goes. What the heck? Are you back? Boop boop.
You can't hear me?
Oh, now I can
Oh
hear
shoot.
you, but
Okay, let
we're
me.
yeah, our synchronization is a bit off.
I'm not on mute. I'm not sure what happened. Let me check. Oh wait, let's see.
Yeah, your audio,
Can you hear me?
what you were breaking up, and then
I
your
can't hear you. I can't hear you. Um, Let me try hanging up. I will. I will hang up and then.
well, now we know why people don't watch this. All right, let's see here. If I go into YouTube, oh, you just jumped right in. Okay, great.
I still can't hear you. What the heck? Okay. Um. Let's see. I'm gonna output to.
Your screen went black for a second, and then it. Oh, yeah, you can't hear me, can you? Oh, here we go. Let's see. Your screen went black for a second, and then it. Oh, yeah, you can't hear me, can you? Okay. So that confirms what I'm doing is going out to YouTube. Oh, here we go. Let's see. Your screen went black. Okay. So. Boop, boop, boop,
Oh
boop,
my
boop,
gosh!
boop.
What the heck?
Hmm. So here's the question. Here's the question. Is this issue because of Ecamm's interview mode? Or is...
Okay.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
I went back into Chrome. I just gave up. Yeah.
I went to YouTube and I verified that what I was saying was going out live. So
Yeah,
even as I
I'm
was
sure it
trying to
was.
talk to you, it was going out live. So the question is this Ecamm's interview mode? Is this Chrome? Is it some sort of weird plugin? I don't think you have told me before you don't run a lot of plugins.
No, and I'm back to running Chrome, and there shouldn't be. I mean, outside of like 1Password, that's pretty much the only. I think I could check what extensions. Yeah, 1Password is the only one I got going.
And that's not going to cause any problem.
Yeah, you wouldn't think so. All right, well let's try this because
Go ahead.
I think we'll say Safari doesn't work, and we'll just stay with Chrome for now.
Which blows.
Yeah.
So
but-
what I said earlier about ditching Chrome, forget all that. Stick with Chrome.
Forget all that. Ditch Chrome unless you're doing a podcast and using Ecamm. Then keep Chrome.
All right. Well, I'm going to write down our start time here, and then
sounds good.
We'll start. Sound good? Do you have any additional notes to add?
Sounds good. No, actually. Okay. How many missing things did you find?
Just a crap ton. No, not
good,
really.
Good.
Not really. I'll mention this in a minute, but this whole thing kind of borders on the concept of being a slight rant, and look.
Yeah.
It's not really, but so what? You want me to run down what I found? I'll just run down. That'll be like a spoiler for anyone watching this live. No one's watching it live, but it'll be a spoiler for anyone watching it live.
It would be, yeah.
So your issue.
You can keep it a surprise for me too.
All right.
Yep.
Other than your issue, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I was looking around and I thought I had found one, but I didn't.
Okay.
It turned out it was there after all. So.
All right. Maybe that's one I found and you found where it is.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll get started then.
Sounds good.
Here we go. And then I'll catch you up on some of the other stuff when we're off air at the end.
Okay.
All right. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. It's For Mac Guys Only, episode number 399 for November 29th, 2022. Lost on the Road to Ventura. Hey everyone, welcome back to For Mac Guys Only, the show for the Mac community, where we share our thoughts and opinions on current Mac news and events. And joining me to talk Mac today is my For Mac Guys Only co-host, Eric Erickson. Hey Eric, how you doing today?
Hey Mike, and I'm lost somewhere in California. So I'm actually always lost. So that's a good title. I like that.
Lost in translation.
Yeah, lost in translation. Yeah. All your base belong to us. It makes
Exactly.
me think of that.
And of course, we're both going to be keeping an eye on the chat room too. So if you are joining us live and you have any questions or comments as we move along, be sure to preface it with a Q or the word question, and we'll try to address it. So, Eric, today's topic came about kind of by accident, really. We were chatting in messages the other day, as we do, and I said, as I do, so what are we going to talk about Tuesday? And your reply was, how about things missing from Ventura? Now, you quickly said, just kidding, but you actually found something missing in Ventura that was pretty important to you, and even more importantly, the new way to do things, well, it just doesn't make any sense. So
You know,
what was that you found, or I should say, lost in Ventura, and have you found any workarounds for it?
not outside of what Apple um, tells you in their help, but yeah. So I was looking. This is something that's actually been there since the classic Mac days, and that's the ability to schedule your Mac to start up and shut down or wake and go to sleep at specified times. So if you, and I'm sure, probably back in the day with desktop Macs and stuff like this, it made even more sense. But it's still something that I like to use now. And there used to be um, a little setting. It was, I think, stuck in the energy control panel, and I think that moved to wherever that was latest. But I think it was still in the energy or the battery. I think it was in the battery preference pane. Excuse me, not control panel. I guess they don't call that anymore. But anyway, you could set a schedule. You could set a wake or startup time, and then you could say how many times you wanted it to repeat. You could just have it, every Monday, every day, and then like every week on a certain day. And the same thing with shutdown or sleep. And I had to wake up at like 5 in the morning to do backups to Time Machine. One of the things Time Machine kind of, for the most part, it runs in the background pretty smoothly. But there are things when you're running certain applications. One of them is Parallels, actually, but another one too is just even if I'm rendering something in Final Cut or After Effects or whatever, that backup seems like it just slows things down for some reason. So I like to kind of put that off to the side and just do that at certain times when I'm not actively using my Mac. So I had it set up to start up at 5, and Time Machine was kind of set to go at that time as well, and that was working pretty well. And then all of a sudden, I discovered it's not taking a backup. The last time it had taken a full backup was on November 9th, and so I looked at, or somewhere around then, and I looked at it, and I figured out, okay, this is not waking up at that time. And then I looked for that scheduling preference pane, and I couldn't find it. And lo and behold, if you look in Apple's help, it tells you can go to the terminal and type in a terminal command. You basically use the PM set utility to wake up your Mac and put it to sleep. And I'm thinking that's real progress. It's just, and it kind of got me thinking even more. Yeah, that they should, for the most part, anything that normal people, and I realize maybe I'm outside the norm, I don't know, but they should really have it ready for you in GUI. I mean, it shouldn't be something that you have to traipse over to the command line just to do. And I'm, like you said, I'm a nerd. I have no problem using the terminal. I do use it for things and I like it, but it just seems to be, this is something simple. It should have been just available, and it was already there, and it's again another one of those things that Apple takes out, and people's like, "Hey, I was using that. What, where is this now?" And it's the same thing. So, yeah. So that's my.
I suspect that being pulled out of what was system preferences has something to do with one of my missing features that I'm going to mention here in a couple of minutes, and it's not really missing; it's just overhauled, and that's settings. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But your mentioning that did get me thinking, what else is missing? I mean, removing useful stuff from macOS is not new. Apple's been doing this to us for ages. And in almost every case, we find a good substitute, or we figure out a workaround, or we just learn to live with it. But while Apple taketh, Apple also giveth. So I don't want to gloss over all the new tools for Macs that come with Ventura, including things that we've already talked about here on the show, like continuity camera, the Spotlight improvements, the passkey support. There's that all-new font book, which, quite frankly, I'm still getting used to. I think it's a little weird, and I don't think it's quite as functional as it was in the past, but I also understand where it could be more functional to some folks. There's improvements to sharing. There's improvements to handoff with FaceTime handoffs. The live text. I love live text out of photos. That's a fantastic new feature.
Yeah.
Image extraction. I'm still trying to figure out how useful that really is. I think it's one of those gee whiz neato keen kind of
Yeah.
features, but I'm not really sure it's all that super useful. And
Right.
there's tons more. There's lots of new stuff in Ventura that makes it kind of worth considering upgrading to. So I guess while this conversation, at least from my perspective, might just border on the fringes of rant territory, I do think it's important to point out some of our frustrations with Ventura, at least now a couple weeks in, and where many Mac users, longtime Mac users, might be frustrated themselves when they first fire up macOS 13. So you already mentioned yours. I want to go, I do have some notes that I want to get to a little bit later where I do talk a little bit more detail about what is involved with the new scheduling system in macOS 13. But have you found any workarounds? Have you looked for a third-party app or something that might take the place and take care of PM set for you?
No, I had not. I just kind of went with it. And then I started thinking maybe I could do my own little workaround and do my own little uh something, whether it's in Swift or whatever, or even just, I mean, obviously you can do stuff with Apple script and whatever too. You can control the command line interface from that, and you write little shell scripts. And so I thought maybe I'll just do something like that, and if it's any useful, if it's any at all useful, and I think other people would use it, I could put it out there someplace for people to find it. But
Sure.
no, I hadn't. And I'm sure there must be something, but I haven't seen anything. Although, since it has been available in the Mac forever and it was easy to use and worked, I'm sure not a lot of people, a lot of developers probably thought about doing anything with it because it was already there.
The one that comes to mind is maybe caffeine. You're like, maybe that's something that's designed
Yeah.
to keep your Mac awake. If maybe
Wake. Yep.
those folks say, hey, we have an opportunity here to improve caffeine and add some more functionality to it. Certainly for
Right.
someone like you, I could see purchasing it if you haven't already
Yeah.
to get that kind of functionality, just that the ease of functionality versus doing it from the terminal. It
Right.
it
Right.
it occurred to me that Apple is almost doing a reverse Sherlocking here. Like
I know.
as Mac OS is continuing to evolve and continuing as much as they say it's not, as it continues to grow closer and closer to iPad OS, not iOS, mind you,
Right.
but iPad OS, as
iPad
they
OS.
as they continue to bring them closer and closer, that they're almost reverse Sherlocking, that they're taking features out and giving opportunities to third-party developers where in the past they took opportunities away from third-party developers. Now they're kind of handing them to them almost on a silver
Yeah.
platter and saying, here, we've determined that this simple interface to PM set is no longer needed in Mac OS
Yeah.
and that
Right.
everybody needs
Exactly.
to go to the terminal. And
Right.
so, here's your opportunity to create a nice simple interface and give
Right.
folks one more thing to run on their Macs to chew up resources.
Right.
But
Exactly. Yeah.
see, I told you this is gonna be on the fringes of rant territory here. But yeah, it almost seems like that's kind of what they're doing. That as they pull some of these features out, they're really opening the door to others to bring some of these features back. I know there used to be control panel slash system preference like alternatives out there, and the need for those kind of disappeared. We didn't need them anymore. Now I wonder if
Right.
there's a need for that to
If we,
come back.
yeah. And I'm wondering too, and you think, I mean, I know that they're obviously still Sherlocking. I mean, if you,
Continuity camera.
ask continuity camera,
Yeah.
or I think the makers of Astropad Studio will tell you too that, hey, sidecar and whatever took that. But also, like you said, they took stuff away, and when you said we've just had to learn to live with it, I was thinking of dashboard, which was ultimately originally a Sherlock of Confabulator and other
Yeah.
things like that, and they have not. There's really nothing around that. I mean, what we're left with is Notification Center, which
Useless.
is okay, but it's not. And I say okay really loosely, but it's nowhere near as useful as Dashboard was, and
No.
it's not going to be when it takes up, a third, not even a third, a quarter of your screen, and it tries to put all that information in there, as opposed to Dashboard, which at one time you could assign to a space to a monitor
Hmm.
and have everything laid out the way you wanted to, and it was terrific. And the only thing was, it was kind of limited to what you could code in on a web page, CSS, HTML, and that sort of thing. Where the Notification Center is a native, or little native applications or widgets, but they could easily do that and still have a dashboard type layout, or where it just goes over the screen, that sort of thing, like they did before,
The,
and these persistent widgets.
the mechanisms to do so are there. They've been there. They continue to be there, and they will continue to be there in the guise of spaces and uh,
Yep.
some of the other features of mission control and things like that. The technology is there to create some sort of environment within which we can run these notification center like widgets without having to deal with this vertical iPhone like sidebar that is really
Right.
useful. I say that sarcastically, on a 13-inch or 24-inch screen.
Right.
Why limit
Right.
our space to that tiny little bar on the right when we have
Right.
all this other space that we can work with?
And
Okay.
that's the whole problem with settings right there,
Yeah. Yes,
which
I'm going to get to
yeah,
that in just a minute.
yeah.
One thing that's still missing for me, and I do have a workaround for it, and again, it's one of those things that the answer, whether it's in the nerd forums or whether it's direct from Apple, the answer is, well, just use the terminal, and that is
Mm.
network utility. Network
Yeah.
utility is admittedly a fringe type app. I'm using that term again.
Right.
It's a fringe type app. Not terribly many users had call to launch it. And yet, for those of us who did use it, it was incredibly useful because it, in one simple app, which Apple didn't have to change, by the way, and that comes into my solution for working around it. Apple did not have to change it. They haven't had to touch it for several iterations of macOS. Several iterations of macOS, they haven't had to touch it. I would even argue going all the way back to OS 10, they haven't had to touch it because it's
Right.
simply a nice interface to these obscure terminal commands like nslookup
Right.
and dig. And that's what I used out of it the most. I didn't use the ping feature. I didn't use the trace route feature. They're
Yep.
there, and I would once in a while take a peek at them. It was nice to be able to look up the hardware addresses of the cards on your Mac very simply without having to drop to the command line, which you still can do from the command line. But again, it was right there. And network utility is, while still there, you can launch it. It simply comes up and says, yeah, I don't exist anymore. Find some other solution or use the terminal. And I
Yeah.
just find that unacceptable. Now,
Yeah, I do too.
my solution to work around that was actually rather simple. Ever since Apple took away network utility, I merely brought a version forward from my previous installation of macOS/OS 10. And I keep a zipped version of it in my Dropbox. And every time literally, every time I upgrade macOS, whether it's a point release or whether it's a full release, I have to unzip that network utility in Dropbox, drop it into my applications folder, and it works again. Until I went to the M1 Series Max. Because the M1 Series Max require signed code. So,
yeah.
for the longest time, I was unable to use my trick. It worked on Intel Macs. It didn't matter if you were running Monterey, whether you were running Ventura, no matter what you were running, on an Intel Mac, it worked fine. Intel Macs did not require this forced signing that M1 Macs apparently do. And I was not aware of that. So I was a little crushed. I couldn't use network utility on my M1 Macs. Then, as I was, every once in a while, I'd try to do a little research on it and see if there was an answer to getting this app working, or if I could find an alternative. There just are not any good alternatives to it. There are some overly complex alternatives, but there just weren't any nice, simple, elegant alternatives to network utility. And in my research one day, I happened to stumble across the error message I was getting when I was trying to launch network utility on an Apple Silicon Mac. And that's what led me to the realization that, oh, it needs to be signed. It's an obscure error, and it wasn't like right in my face that this isn't signed. And so I did some more searching. And after a few days of Googling and trying to figure out how I can circumvent this requirement, I stumbled across the answer on, of all places, VLC's website. So VLC, Video LAN Client, the standalone open source application, apparently had the same problem. So even though it was an Intel app, like network utility is, and it would work on an Apple Silicon Mac, it wasn't launching. And so through this thread, this developer thread on VLC's website, it was actually a GitHub related type site, I found a way to force overwrite the signature on network utility. This will work on any app that you are trying to run that requires it to be signed to run. You can, and I know what we just said, you can drop to the terminal, and there is a terminal command. There's no need for an app for this. There's a terminal command
Right.
called code sign. One word, code sign. And the rather than dig through all the instructions on how to use code sign and all that stuff, I found a simple, streamlined version of the command that worked with network utility. Code sign -F -S, and then the name of the app, networkutility.app. When you press return on that, it signs it using a signature that's generated on the fly on your Mac, and then it worked. And I tested zipping it up. I tested moving it to other Macs. I tested moving it to my wife's M1 Mac. I tested tested on different on friends' Macs, and they said, yeah, it worked. So just now, it does say it's signed by me. And that's cool. I don't have any problem with it. I don't intend to ever distribute this. But now in my Dropbox folder, I have 2 copies of network utility. One that's got this temporary or artificial signature on it. It's not really, it's a real signature. It's signed by my Mac.
Right.
But I've got one with that signature on it, so I can run it on M1 Macs. And I've got the original untouched Intel version for running on Intel Macs. And boom, I'm happy. So that's my workaround. So network utility is still missing in action, but if you need it,
You can run it.
You can run it. You can, if you're on an Intel Mac, you just grab a copy from an older Mac that has it. If you're on an M1 Mac, just grab that older copy and use this code sign command to add a signature to it, and the Mac will be happy as a clam.
So the M1 wants it signed, but it doesn't care who signs it or what is, how it's done. I was going to say, you have the network utility running on your M1 Mac until Rosetta is killed, right?
Well, that's true. That's true. I am up against the timeline here. I'm up against
Yeah,
whenever Rosetta is killed. Now, Rosetta is, let's see, what did we have, like 3 years of Rosetta in the past?
at least. Yeah,
I have a hard time believing that Rosetta will be limited to 3 years
I do too
when
because
Apple's still selling brand new Mac Pros.
yeah, yeah. I don't think it's going to be. I really think I don't know. I mean, I guess there's probably no reason to feel this way because when they jumped from the PowerPC to Intel, you could probably make this same argument. But I feel like with this being like a final jump and not, especially with everything not there yet, because when they jumped from PowerPC to Intel, they were able to transform every single Mac. They were able to essentially throw an Intel processor in it and into every Mac that they had, whether it was a Mac Mini, the MacBook line, the Power Mac, or which was the Mac, and that ultimately became the Mac Pro line. They were able to do where this here isn't easy of a transfer. Like you said, they're still selling Mac Pros, and
Yeah.
I just think too, there are going to be people out there that bought an Intel Mac really fairly recently, and you know how you can use Macs, 5, easily 5, but even more like 10 years. I think my mom had her last MacBook Air. I want to say, if it wasn't 10 years, it was darn close to it. And it's one of those things where if people aren't really pushing their Macs to their,
No.
they're using it for web browsing, emailing, maybe some word processing here and there, or watching content. They're not. It works fine, and it's one of those things where I think it's going to be. They're not just going to update want to update because Rosetta has been killed. So I think that's going to stick around for a while. I really do.
The only pushing being done is on Apple's part, quite frankly.
Right.
And
Right.
that's where you get into the discussion we had before on Open Core Legacy Patcher and other techniques to continue to provide a little life to an older Mac that Apple has determined is incapable of running Ventura when Open Core proves quite
Otherwise,
handily otherwise.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, it's disappointing in a way. It's certainly understandable. I understand where Apple is coming from, but as long as they continue to sell Intel Macs, which again they're actively doing, not only are they
right,
selling the Mac Pro, but they're selling the high-end Mac Mini.
yeah. I was going to say I knew there was another Mac in there too that was still Intel. Yeah,
So I'm thinking minimum. Well, maybe this is just a wish, but minimum 3 years from the point that they cease selling the last Intel Mac.
yeah. I would have to say, and
That's
I would think it would be longer yet too.
that's my hope.
I
And quite
Yeah,
unlike Rosetta before, there's the Apple Silicon processors are so powerful. I don't really see a reason to stop providing
no,
Rosetta. The
right,
only reason to stop providing Rosetta would be, well, one, Apple just doesn't want to put the resources into it any longer. That's one.
right,
And two, the market really has moved on. There's
right.
there's nobody else left
There's
running
just
anything that's Intel.
Intel.
And I guess at that point, if you do still need it, you just keep older hardware around.
Right, right, exactly. And I don't know. I don't know that that's a lot of resources on Apple's part to keep Rosetta going. I mean, I don't. I mean, I guess I can't say one or the other, but I mean, I can't imagine them having like a team of 20 people working on Rosetta and keeping it going. I mean, maybe there's one guy to make sure, but I don't think it's a
Yeah.
real big.
If anything, there's
It's,
a small team working on it. I can see perhaps a need to maintain it from a security perspective. They
right.
have it working really darn well at the moment,
Yeah.
amazingly well. There's
Amazingly well.
unlike
Yep.
Rosetta One, you could tell. I
Yeah.
When you were using Rosetta on an Intel Mac to run PowerPC apps, you could tell when it was a PowerPC app. Now
Yeah.
I can't tell. I have no idea
No,
unless I
it's
dig into it and see if it's Intel, Universal, or native.
right.
It's that
Right.
good. It's that good.
It
And I
is.
cannot see any reason to not include it unless, like I said, the market's completely moved on. There's no reason to have it in there anymore, or Apple simply doesn't want to devote the resources to it, which perhaps is the more
Right.
likely scenario.
Right. Right.
One other thing I noticed, and I don't know if you've noticed this too, Eric, but the print dialog boxes, the new print dialog boxes, are simply
Yes.
bonkers. They're
Yeah.
bonkers.
I
The
yeah.
and I'll mention this in a second. I get it. I get it. But my biggest beef with them is that it simply doesn't remember settings between print jobs. I don't know how
Yeah.
often you've
That's a
done
big
that.
deal.
You know, you've got a special print job. You're running off to your printer
Yep.
from, let's say, Affinity Publisher, and you change it to the right color space. You change the right paper type. You do all that kind of stuff, and you run off 2 or 3 pages, and you're like, oh, I got to run off a couple more of those, and you go in to run them off, and all the settings are reset. In the past, it
Yeah.
would remember between print jobs. Now, it might forget if you close the app and you go back into the app, and it might say, okay, well, we got to
Right.
start over there. But in the past, in between jobs, you know, short of quitting the application, in between jobs, it would remember what your last print settings were. Now it's almost like it deliberately is forgetting them. It's just saying, I'm going to
Yeah. And
reset it.
I thought that was a bug, and it's
I
not.
hope it's a
So
bug.
that's yeah. I just assumed that it was something, that it was something to be fixed, because why would you not want to have that? I mean,
I know.
you like create a preset out of every little. That would be, that's just annoying. But I mean, aside from that, I mean, just even how it looks, I don't like the little disclosure trying, having to break out every little thing. I don't know. I don't even. You just
The,
kind of wonder, where did that come from? Whose design idea was that?
well, I have some thoughts on that. But so there's something I read in this past week as I was searching for things that have gone missing in Monterey and Big Sur and Ventura, because they all kind of fit together. There's not a whole lot of difference between them, and some of the things that we're talking about very likely were missing straight up in Monterey or were missing in Big Sur.
Right. Right.
The print dialog changes are absolutely brand new to Ventura. The settings
Yeah.
box is absolutely, settings app, I should say, is absolutely brand new to Ventura. But as I was researching that, there are some basic tenets of software design that Apple has put out. And basically, this was in some article that was talking about changes in Ventura. And basically, Ventura violates every single one of them. And one of the things is, look, if you have a checkbox and it works, don't replace it with something else like a slider. Don't do it. It
Yeah.
works.
Yeah.
Don't make changes just for change's sake. And all
Say, yeah.
three tenants, which I wish I had bookmarked because I don't have them in front of me, so I'm going to get them wrong. But I do remember that one. If you have something that works, don't just change it to change it. Don't change it to some other new method of doing the exact same thing, because that's only going to
Yeah.
confuse users. The other thing that it mentioned
Right.
is don't put weird little buttons and stuff into an app that aren't descriptive, that don't tell people what they're going to do when they click them. And Ventura is full of those things.
Yeah.
Specifically and we'll talk about this in a second, settings under networking, there's an obscure little oval button with 3 dots on it in the bottom right corner. What does it do?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a number of those where you see the little three dot, like the little more
Yeah.
thing. And yeah.
Or a question mark. They're using question marks in places where they should have perhaps a disclosure triangle or something like that.
Right.
It's bizarre. It's just
Yeah.
and I intended to say this later, but I'll say it now. It's sloppy. And
It is.
going with what you said earlier, weird little icons and stuff that don't really mean anything. Yeah. What the heck? What was going through their mind as they designed this stuff? I do kind of get the concept. I do kind of get the concept, but as I'm going through and adjusting these print settings that we talked about, the one thing I noted here is don't bother going back to check that your settings are correct. In other words, if you go in and you make a settings change, don't go back and check that that settings change you made is correct, because it wipes it out. When you go in and
It'll
check
be
it,
gone. I know.
it resets it.
Right.
What the heck? So
Ugh.
really what you have to
Yeah.
do, okay, so that's my experience. Let me just put it that way. This is my experience. If I go to make a settings change, let's say I change it from, often I change the color space as I'm printing. So let's say I change the color space to Adobe RGB or something like that as I'm printing, because I happen to know that on a particular printer, that setting works better for getting color more true to what's on my screen. So rather than let the printer guess, I
Right.
know that Adobe RGB works better. So I make that change. Well, if I go back and say, did I make that change? Did I not make that change? If I did make that change and I go back into the color space, it's reset. It's
Right. So you'll
weird.
never see it.
So I've gotten used to kind of changing a setting and then simply crossing my fingers and doing a dance to the computer gods that the setting will be remembered when the job makes it to the
Right.
printer itself. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Who knows? But you it's kind of like you
It's
just
just
make the changes and hope that it worked. Now, again, this is one
it's
of
just
those things
printer
that,
roulette.
yeah, it's roulette, and it didn't need to be changed.
No.
So
No.
they made the change. Okay, great. As you're adjusting settings, if you haven't upgraded to Ventura yet, one thing to know is that as you're adjusting settings, there's an insane amount of scrolling up and down as you adjust settings for any one
Yeah.
particular print job. Now, worse, as I said, oh no, I didn't say this. As you adjust, so let's say I go in and I make that settings change to a new color space. I found that after I close out of that little mini dialog box, the main print dialog window itself jumps around the screen. It doesn't stay where it originally
Wow.
was. It actually jumps down, which is weird. That I hope this is a
Weird.
bug. I hope this is a bug. And
It's got to be a bug.
I hope that it's a bug that came about because they made so many changes to how these things work. In general, this stuff works. It just works in a really, as I said, wonky way. Now,
Yeah.
all that said, I I'm kind of with you. I understand what you're saying. It's weird to have this big long scrolling window. But my feeling is that it's a sloppy implementation of what should be a good idea.
Yeah.
In other words, rather than bury everything under weirdly named menus that may or may not make sense, which is what we've gotten used to, giving the user a scrollable list of options when printing kind of makes that sometimes arcane process of just wanting to print something easier. So
Right.
I get that. I get that. So
Yeah.
I kind of expect this is going to evolve over Ventura's lifetime, and maybe not even hit its stride until macOS 14. But we're going to see some changes made to this, and as printer manufacturers adapt to it and adjust the print drivers to accommodate Ventura, I'm hoping that some of the wonkiness disappears. But
Yeah. And
that's one of my other items. The
you know,
print
I think
dialog box is just off the wall.
yeah, and I think the jumping around thing, I think that happens because if you disclose a few, they have those different settings, and if you click on the triangle and expand it out, and you do it with another one, and then let's say you go into the color matching, that brings up the little thing where you can use color sync or vendor or whatever. When that brings that up, it like closes the other things that you had open,
Yeah.
and then it shrinks the window and it moves it down, and it's just really stupid. It's like, I don't know,
It
they
it
didn't test that very well.
it's yeah, I don't think it was tested very well. I mean, let's face it, the folks who are testing this kind of stuff are of a different generation than us. I know
Right,
that.
right.
I know that. And printing is one of those weird things that old people like us do. But
Right.
I
Yeah,
print stuff for our businesses. I print stuff for
yeah,
the retail floor in our store. I print stuff for clients. Printing is still necessary. There's something to be said for
you bet,
tangible objects in our hands versus just everything done on
you
screen.
bet.
And
Yeah,
I have a feeling that there's a perhaps I have thoughts on this later too, but the perhaps some generational differences in how Ventura was approached from a coding perspective.
yeah. I think you mentioned that, and or somewhere I kind of read that where some of the younger developers today might have different ideas, and it definitely shows through if that's the case,
And that's great.
for
That's great.
sure.
Look,
Yeah,
change is cool. Change can be cool.
right,
But sometimes change for change's sake, just to make something work differently on
right.
purpose,
Isn't this
it's weird.
right?
Speaking of
Yeah.
which, while not missing, it's certainly not missing. We should probably point out that About This Mac received a rather major overhaul, but in a minor way. And this kind of goes to what we are just talking about a moment ago. It seems as if About This Mac was designed for phone screens, not for Macs. Some text flows weirdly. It's a really
You
tiny
gotta
window
watch your
now in the middle
audio.
of your screen. Some text flows weirdly. It especially flows weirdly on Intel machines. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the term widows in desktop publishing. A widow is like one word that's kind of left dangling on its own at the end of a paragraph, and as you're doing layout work, there are widows in the About This Mac window. It's very strange. It's also now missing quick access to displays, to storage, to support and warranty info, and a quick way to get to system report. Then, while I do know that you can press Option while clicking About This Mac and go directly to system report, that's not changed. That still is there. That also bypasses the other previously useful info that was all contained in a single space, especially when you're working in a support situation. Okay, we're going to take a brief break here. Eric disappeared for a second. I could hear him being exasperated. So we're going to break while he rejoins us. Excuse me. So we seem to have an issue. The first couple episodes like this we had no problems at all. I don't know why suddenly at the end of October we had all these issues with Eric joining us live. One of the things I need to test is getting someone else into the conversation, getting someone else in and see what's happening with them versus with Eric so that we can kind of try to troubleshoot where the problem lies. But what I started doing last time we recorded is there's a handy dandy bandwidth statistics window that pops up in Ecamm Live. And this shows us not only does it show us what we need to have a nice, reliable stream to YouTube, but it also shows things like the rolling required bandwidth, the rolling average throughput, momentary actual bandwidth, and momentary required bandwidth. And then it gives actual, so that's live. So yeah, I can literally watch it. The rolling required bandwidth is 3.19, 3.16, 3.18. I mean, it's going faster than I can read it. But then it gives average required, average throughput, and target data rate. So we're looking at a target data rate of only 3.32 megabits per second. That's it. And we are averaging, our average throughput is 3.31 megabits per second. Our average required is 3.31 megabits per second. And let's see, let me just send a quick reply to Eric here. Yep, I saw you drop out, comma, just waiting for you to rejoin when you can, period. And I opened this window, bandwidth statistics, because I was curious, is it my internet? And yet every time we're having these problems and I check YouTube, my stream seems to be coming through okay. So I'm really not sure where the problem is. We're supposing, the supposition is that it's on Eric's end. And yet it still doesn't make sense. I mean, he has bandwidth coming out the ears. Certainly far more than I do. Now we just peaked real quickly here. Momentary actual bandwidth peaked quite a bit higher than any other, but I can't see. We're certainly not pushing the limits of my internet connectivity. We don't seem to be pushing the limits of Eric's, and yet somewhere along the line we're having issues. So again, we need to get somebody else in the call. I guess I could do a test call with someone else and just see, are we having the same problems there versus the same problems with Eric? In fact, momentary actual bandwidth just dropped way below 2. No, I'm sorry, way below 3 megabits per second, and then shortly thereafter peaked at around 4 or so. But again, I don't see, we should be in pretty good shape there. Now, where Ecamm does require more bandwidth is when you start to bring more people in. So if you have 2, 3, 4, you can do up to 10 people with Ecamm Live. As you bring more people in, you need much more bandwidth to handle that load. So we're about an hour in, and we're just in a little break here. We just finished talking about this Mac. Oh, you're already in. I just assigned you to a placeholder, and you were already in the placeholder. Cool.
I need a placeholder. I had to restart Chrome. Sorry. Man, I don't know what happened. You were talking, and then I just lost you. You just went silent.
Well, you could see me though, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's plain as day. And I kept thinking it would come back, but it never did.
I could hear you making exasperated noises.
So you could still hear me then.
Yeah.
I think I did say at one point I lost your audio, but I...
that I didn't hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, shall we just move on?
Let's move on.
All right.
Because it was going great up until that point.
Yep. 53 minutes of greatness. Well, 42 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. All right. So.
Still greatness there, no matter what.
Where did we leave? I just went ahead. I knew you were having trouble. I just went ahead and finished the whole about this Mac thing.
That sounds
Okay.
good. Oh, what was the about this Mac?
Oh, in short, about this Mac seems to be designed for phone screens, not for Macs.
Yeah, I did see that. That was really weird. That is really. I don't want to look at it now because I don't want it to screw up the. But I mean that. Yeah, yeah. I
Some,
don't. Why? Again, why did they change it?
yeah, I was saying, some text flows weirdly, especially on Intel machines. It seems like as your Mac has more information about it that needs to be displayed, what ends up happening is you end up with these widows. You know that term widow from desktop publishing, where
Yeah.
there's
Yep.
a single
Widows and orphans.
word at the end of a paragraph just kind of dangling there. That's
Yeah.
a widow. And this about this Mac screen, because they insisted on making it so weirdly narrow, has problems with widows, which just weird.
Yeah. Shoot, I wish I'd love to look at it right now, but I don't dare. It'll just mess us up,
Yeah.
and
I
I'll have
I
to relaunch again.
I do not have that problem with about this Mac on. Oh no, I do. Yeah, so on my Intel Mac, it's just the layout's just weird on it. On the Mac Studio, it's fine. So
So it
clearly,
just affects Intel Macs only.
yeah, the more information there is about the Mac that needs to be displayed, the more likely you're going to see weird display artifacts
Widows.
because they oddly insisted on making it so narrow. It just doesn't make any sense. I've got
Yeah.
at minimum we have 13-inch screens. At most we have
Yeah.
27-inch screens or more. And
Right.
yet
Or
they
more.
make this teeny tiny little about this Mac window. I don't understand.
What did? What are they not telling us? Are we only going to have 5-inch screens from now? Are we going back to the 9-inch screen? The thing is, it goes back to what you were saying though. Don't change something don't fix something that was broken. Don't change something just to change it. There was nothing wrong with the about this Mac at
No.
all. I mean, it was clear, it was concise. I mean, you knew exactly. It told you what you needed to know. I, I don't know.
And it gave you in one spot especially in a support situation, it gave you one
Yeah,
spot where you can find out information
to go
about
to.
displays, storage,
Yep,
warranty information, and you could
your Mac
easily
model
get
number.
the model number. You can get the model number now, but you could easily get to a
Yeah,
system report.
right,
So
right.
yeah, it's an odd regression.
It is. Yeah, that really is a missing function there. Well, you could go to terminal, get that.
You can go to terminal and get it, and gosh darn it, you better like it.
You better like it.
Now, that brings us to settings. That brings us to settings. Now, I have no doubt that this will come to be remembered as an incredibly divisive feature among Mac users as time goes on, if not the most divisive feature. And this is going to be something we argue about for years to come. No doubt that's going to be the case. But overall, as we've already said, organization of settings leaves a lot to be desired. Many items are hard to find without searching. And in some
Yeah,
cases, items were just moved for the sake of moving them. It just feels messy. It just feels messy.
it does.
So, some
It it it,
examples.
it it's a mess itself.
What was that?
I said it's a mess to itself. I mean, it really settings to me. When I think of settings, I just think of a mess. And the weird thing about it is on the iPhone and even the iPad. And I know again, this is one of those things where they're trying to make it more iOS, iPad OS, whatever. it looks fine and it makes sense and it works because
Hmm.
of the smaller screen size. And I think to have it in a little window, and I don't know that system preferences was that much bigger, but that layout made sense, and it was something that everybody was used to. That horizontal icon layout of icons as opposed to this vertical thing, and then you would click on an icon you want, it would go into it, and whatever features, whatever. You didn't need to see everything on the left hand side. You didn't need to see the other icons that were there while you were. I don't know. I did, and I know system preferences was kind of evolved from control panel.
Hmm.
But again, it's the sort of thing, even if you were not ever a Mac user and the first time that you used a Mac was with Ventura on some Apple Silicon machine, you, I think it would still be more confusing than the way system preferences was before, because even on Windows, you have control panels that have a similar layout, and it's just, I don't know, it it doesn't make sense to why they changed that the way. And granted, it wasn't like system preferences didn't have issues. I mean, they have all of the appearance and layout functions inside of a preference pane called General. Probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That came from the classic Mac too, and to have it in something called Appearance maybe makes more sense. But still, it's just, I don't know.
Well, one of the things that they did is they've split things up. Things that used to be together are now spread out all over
Yeah,
the place. So, for example, as I went through it, I found that login items are now moved to general. Login items kind of made more sense under the individual user.
users. Yep.
Firewall was moved out of security. And I suppose it makes sense to put it in network, but it also makes sense under security. And
Security. Have it under
why they
both.
couldn't why they couldn't have two links to the same spot is confusing when I mentioned that Wi-Fi is listed twice. It's listed once on its own
Yeah.
and it's listed once
Yeah.
under network. And when you click each one, it leads to the exact same setting. Is there a difference?
Yeah.
No, there's no difference. It's just weird. Password, login password, that was broken out of users and groups, which is cool, but they also split password related settings into this new setting and the old users and group settings. Why not group all the related settings together? Instead, they split them. They
Yeah.
put them in 2, 3 different locations. And there are several sections of settings that have been split up like this. And, at least in the case of passwords and logins and networking, it's not always for the better. In fact, it can be downright maddening as you hunt for
It
settings
is.
that used to be categorized together and are now found in entirely different, seemingly unrelated sections of settings. Now, you mentioned the verticalness of settings. And I suppose we should be thankful for the fact that at least we can expand it vertically, but I keep wanting to
Right.
expand it horizontally. It feels too constrained to me. It feels like it should have more space on a horizontal way. And again, remember, we're not using vertical screens on our Mac. We're not using an iPad. We're not using an iPhone. We're using a Mac, where our screens are
Right.
horizontal, not vertical. And so to have everything like the print dialog and to have settings shift to this vertical way of displaying stuff just doesn't make sense on a landscape screen.
Screen. Screen that
Now,
has more space horizontally than it does vertically. Yeah.
right, exactly. Why not just make, if you're going to do this to settings, why not just make it an app that can be run full screen if you want to? Why not just make it a
Right.
standard
Right.
windowed app rather than a fixed size app? Now, to be fair,
Right.
system preferences couldn't be resized either. System preferences couldn't be
Right.
resized. But the weird thing is, if you click on a system preference that's kind of a vestigial remnant of a previous app you had installed. For example, I don't use Quark any longer, but I still had the Quark updater. And so I saw it at the bottom
Hmm.
of settings and I clicked on it. Clicking on the Quark updater setting allowed the settings window to expand horizontally. So
Like it was before.
it's just
Yeah.
weird. It's just weird.
Yeah.
And worst of all, the ability to turn off preferences that or settings, I should say, I have to say settings that we have no need for has been wiped from existence. So at the very least, I hope that Apple will give us the ability to once again, because we could do it before, once again reorder the settings so that I can put all the useless
Yeah.
settings, I should say useless to me, the useless settings at the
Yeah.
bottom rather than have to
Right.
slog through them each time I want to make changes to my Mac. It's almost like, well,
It.
I get it, but this is just the way you're going to do it. There's going to be no options to do it any differently, and you just have to kind of like it. And if you can't find something, search for it. It's like
Right.
use the terminal,
Right.
use the search bar. And I find that almost every single time I go into settings to look for something, I have to search for it. There isn't there
Search for
doesn't
it.
seem to be a logical
Right.
place to find things. So if it was
No.
just a matter of organizing things better, cool. But it seems as if all that Apple's accomplished so far is to sow confusion.
Yeah. It's a terrible. It's kind of a travesty almost. The thing is, like you said, um, you couldn't enlarge or shrink the system preferences pane app either or window. However, that's because it dynamically, essentially, widen itself or shrank itself depending upon how many preference panes it had to show.
Right.
And where this doesn't, you're going to scroll no matter what. And it's just, yeah, it's again one of those things that it boggles the mind on. There's so many things that they could have changed or added or whatever. This was a complete waste of time, and it does just make you long for the days of the system preferences, and
And
I
that's
just don't
that's
like this
saying
at all.
something. That is saying something. If
It
you long
is.
for the
It
days of
is.
system preferences, that's saying something.
System preferences. It
So
is.
yeah, I'm not gonna go so far as to say it's a travesty, but I will say it's sloppy. In some
It
ways, it's
is.
illogical. In some ways, it's more logical. Let's be fair. In some ways, it does make more sense. And
Right.
like with the print dialog box, I have no doubt that settings is going to continue to evolve along with Ventura itself. Maybe Apple's need to bring consistency to how things are done in iPad OS is look, maybe it's worth the pain of transitioning away from 22 years of doing things more or less the same way.
Right.
So
Right.
I'll reserve judgment for that until we see what the future of settings brings us. But I feel like Apple needs to remember that, as we mentioned a moment ago, with the landscape screens versus the portrait screens, Apple needs to remember that how we use our Macs and the things that we want to tweak, the things we want to customize on our Macs to make them work better for us, are worlds apart from how we use and want to customize things on an iPad. So
Right.
while
Exactly.
overall settings isn't bad, but it's not great either. And yeah, we'll get used to it. I mean, we do have
Right.
22 years to do so.
Yeah.
But I wish I could say more about it than meh. I mean,
Yeah.
that's about the best I can say. It's not great.
Yeah.
It's not bad. It just is. And when you're going to
Yeah.
do something as dramatically different as overhauling settings and print dialog boxes and things like that, at least make us say, wow, this is so much better than before. And instead,
Better.
I
Right.
say, Eh,
Yeah, exactly. No, that's exactly right. And I think too, there are things that, and of course, I can't think of anything right now, but I mean, there are things that were developed on the iPhone and iPad because of the small screen size, because of the limited power. And
right,
just like the original Mac was, a lot of the things that were in the original Mac are still around today because of the constraints that they had when they developed the original Mac. And
right.
that saying, or constraints will set you free. They're able to. It's probably the saying, necessity is the mother of invention. It comes about because of the constraints of what you're having to deal with, and in certain things, if they figured out a better way of doing something on the iPhone or the iPad because of the whatever constraints, yeah, and it'll work on the Mac. I think, yeah, definitely bring it. But just because you have a screen layout on iOS and iPad OS, don't bring it to the Mac just because, well, we wanted to have continuity between all three devices. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't
Yeah,
necessarily think that's good for all the other users, and certainly the way they did it here, I think, wasn't very good.
yeah. There does not seem to be anyone. We texted this back and forth. There does not seem to be anyone at Apple willing to say this is wrong.
Yeah,
And uh,
there's
look,
no
it's been
right,
11 years since Steve Jobs passed. To say, well, this isn't what Steve Jobs would do. Well, it's been 11 years and a lot of stuff has changed at Apple. And
right,
I don't think it's really fair to say
yeah,
this isn't what Steve Jobs would do. But gosh darn it, Steve
right,
Jobs would sit there and use the stuff. And when it didn't work, he didn't mind telling people it didn't work.
he,
Heck, he would fire people if it didn't
right,
work. And
exactly.
I wonder if that's not missing. Someone needs to
I
be hypercritical. Someone needs to say, look,
Yep,
even if they do it in a softer way, this is great. I see what you're trying to do here, but you know what? This just isn't working. We need to go back to the drawing board and do it better. Not do it different,
better, right,
do it better. Do it better. Don't,
right,
somebody must
right,
have noticed the widows in the about this Mac screen, but nobody said
right,
anything.
right.
Are you telling me? Well, maybe this is true. Maybe this is true that every single person at Apple is using an M1 Mac, every single one, and you
That's
know,
possible.
it's possible. It's possible that every single beta tester is using an M1 Mac. Now I know that's not true. And
No,
are there not beta testers who are looking at this stuff and saying this is wrong? Or are there beta testers looking at this stuff and saying this is wrong and Apple's not listening? That's a big
I
difference.
wonder if it's the latter. Yeah.
That's a big difference. But simple
And,
things like little, text that's not flowing right in a window shouldn't be overlooked. That's a detail that Apple is famous for not allowing
right,
to happen. And yet
right.
it's happening, and I'm a little concerned about that.
I was just going to say, people might think we're being a little hypercritical or a little too detailed or whatever, but this is Apple at its best. This is what Apple does. They are in the details, and
Yeah,
yes, Apple's has broke its own user interface rules before in the past. They've done stuff, but
yeah,
I don't think that, and I'm not saying this is totally egregious or whatever, but I think that's just it. There needs to be somebody there that says, this doesn't work. This isn't, this is not Apple. This isn't how we would do it. This,
yeah.
I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. There needs to, well, now there's not even a Johnny Ive there. Before I think we were kind of saying, there needed to be a Steve Jobs telling Johnny Ive, don't do this or this doesn't work. Now there's not even a Johnny Ive there that says, because I don't, who knows? He probably wouldn't have let go the about this Mac, with the Windows. And you're right. Maybe everyone does have an M1 there, but I think I'd be more willing to believe that there probably are plenty of Intel Macs still within Apple. Again, why replace stuff if you don't need to?
Right. Right.
I
They're leasing it
I
all.
don't
They're
know.
leasing it all. They have to replace it every 3 years.
Right. Right.
One last thing missing. One last thing missing. And then we'll get to the fun stuff. And I'm a little surprised that you didn't bring this up, Eric, because it actually seems like something that you might
Oh
use.
no.
But
Yeah.
while we're discussing network settings, Apple has removed the network locations feature. So network
Oh,
locations, again,
wow.
is one of those obscure features, but it was a feature that
Yeah.
allowed users, especially in a business environment, to quickly
That's
switch
a nice feature.
between different sets of Wi-Fi, different sets of Ethernet, and other network settings depending on where you are located. So you could have a network location for work, you could have a network location for home, and look, much like the scheduled sleep and shutdowns, you can use the command line utility. There's one called network setup. It's still there. You can use it. And you can use it to accomplish the same thing, more or less. But why should we have to? And who has the time to learn all the command line switches via man pages when it was just a click away
Right.
before? So this is
Yeah.
when I did a search for things that have been removed from Ventura, this came up pretty consistently. And frankly, I was surprised. I was as surprised to see that networks locations was gone, just as I was surprised to hear that scheduled sleep and shutdown were gone. Even if I didn't use either one consistently,
Right.
or
Right.
even on a regular basis, even though I didn't use them frequently enough to notice that they were gone right away, it shocked me that they were gone because they're basic functions that many users, especially like I said in a business environment in the case of network locations, use on a daily basis. So what the heck?
Yeah. And that just makes me wonder too. I can't believe, here's the thing. It's not like we just jumped to, we went from 32-bit, now we're at 64-bit, or went from the Intel processor to Apple Silicon, or some other big jump. We've already done all of that, and everything was there. It's just, this is just an operating system update, and you kind of wonder, why take that out?
Mm-hmm.
What was the big deal? And it wasn't something that I'm thinking that they would had to devote a lot of time and effort to, updating for each, increment of the operating system. I use the network locations, although it's been a while. But like you, even though I don't use it consistently, it's amazing that they took it out.
Yeah.
That they just, I can't figure out why. And I don't know if it's because of this settings thing that, when they converted it over, that they're like, well, we don't know where to put this, so we'll just take it out.
We'll leave it out
I
for
don't
now.
I don't know.
We'll leave it
We'll
out for
leave it
now
out.
because we
Yeah.
have no idea where to put it. Yeah, and that was my thought, is that both of these things that are clearly missing, not just stuff that's
Yeah.
different, but stuff that's clearly missing, scheduled sleep and wake and network locations are things that were in system preferences before. And now we have this
Yeah.
new settings app where things are moved around. Yeah, most stuff is there. It's in different places. It's in multiple places. It may have been overlooked, quite frankly. I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know how they went
I don't
about
know.
redesigning this. Did they map it out on the wall? Did they just go through it one screen at a
Yeah.
time? What kind of effort was made into making sure that settings that were important to users, not all users, but to users,
Right.
remained accessible even after this switchover? So I'm not sure.
Right.
But that brings me to my rant. As I was typing up notes for this, I just started typing and typing and more typing, and I realized I ended up with a little bit of a rant here. But this long-standing argument in favor of the Macintosh, or the long-standing argument in favor of the Macintosh, has always been to make complex tasks easier, no matter what that task was, no matter what it was. Formatting a disk, writing a paper, printing a document, no matter what it was, the going back all the way to the beginning of the Macintosh, the argument in favor of buying a Mac versus a PC was make complex tasks easier. You said it best. You said a perfectly fine, easy to use app gets trashed and users can find what they need in the terminal.
Yeah.
Sure. Why not? The terminal has its place, and I like you, I use it for several tasks. But when it comes to arcane dig and NSLOOKUP commands, look, it's easier to use an app that's designed to yield the same results with minimal effort. Right. As you said earlier, I'm a nerd. I don't need nerds telling me to just use the terminal. I know how to do that.
Right.
But you know what? It's more complicated. It's more time consuming. And when the answer is just use the terminal, well, that's lazy. Now, that lazy response also tells me that they forget that nerds are also lazy and we like simple stuff too.
Right.
We like simple stuff. It's almost like Apple's macOS development team was infiltrated by rogue Windows developers, where things used to be simple, they're now more complex.
Right.
Where we used to have choices, we now have a single method to accomplish the same things. And as we said, many of these things that we're talking about today are niche features. But why remove them if you don't have to? For parity?
Yeah.
For consistency?
Right.
With what? Well,
I don't even see where the parity or consistency.
This parity and consistency is apparently to be made with another platform that Apple themselves have said that they have no intention of merging with macOS. So this whole settings redevelopment is, to me, a waste of time and resources. What we had worked, and it worked pretty well. It was flexible, and it allowed us to work with our Mac settings the way that we wanted to. Now, it was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Settings will never be perfect. And look, admittedly, system preferences could be confusing too. I'll admit that. But the tools were there to help make it easier to understand for a wider range of users. It was one of our tips a couple months ago. Here's how you can rearrange system preferences by name. Here's how you can turn system preferences off and on again. Here's how you can rearrange system preferences. All that's out the window. So maybe if no, let me go back to settings again real quick. Because settings is far more rigid. And by splitting settings up that logically go together, it's more confusing. And that makes it not only an unnecessary change, but an unnecessary change for the worse. So what I was going to say a moment ago is maybe if Apple didn't force itself on an annual upgrade path, well, then the team behind macOS development would have more time to refine things. They would have more time to think things through. But to me, Ventura, and specifically the areas where they made an attempt for parity, was clearly rushed. And once again, I know we've said this before, once again, it feels as if we are the beta testers here. Now, we mentioned this earlier. You can always kind of tell when a new generation of you can always kind of tell when a new generation of developers takes over. And I had been thinking about that recently because as you look back at previous iterations of macOS and OS 10, you can almost see that generational shift each time it happens. And I know, as I said to you in our texting back and forth, I know, get off my lawn. But look, Eric, I don't know what you're bitching about. This is so much easier now. All you have to do to schedule your Mac sleep-wake schedule is in the terminal app on your Mac, you enter the PM set command. And if you don't know all the commands for PM set, well, you just see the PM set man page for the list of commands that you can use.
Pages.
And then, of course, here are some examples they give us for how you can use it. PM set -G sched. Okay, that shows the current schedule. Sudo PM set repeat wake M 8:00:00. That's simple, right? That says you schedule your Mac to wake at 8 a.m. every Monday. Awesome. Or you could do
can't forget the sudo.
Yeah, right. You have to do sudo. And by the way, what does that stand for? Right? Sudo PM set repeat cancel. That repeats or that cancels the current repeating schedule. After each of those, you just press return. Simple. And remember, if you need more help, Eric, all you have to do is just see the PM set man page. I mean, everyone knows what that is, right? I mean, I do. I know what it is.
The difficulty, well, exactly. Everybody knows what a man page is. And the what I had to go through before to cancel my repeat schedule, I checked a box.
Right.
Or I unchecked the box, I should say. It was checked, I unchecked it. And I didn't have to type in a password after that either.
Right.
It was insane.
If you,
I'm wondering
if you don't know, if you don't know what man is, if you don't, man is short for manual. If you don't know that you can type in man space PM set and get a scrolling, by the way, it just scrolls off your screen, a scrolling list of all the commands that you can do. And to be fair, there are websites that are just pages and pages of man command, man pages for the commands of Unix.
Right.
But if you don't know how to use man, well, all you have to do is work professionally in a Unix environment for 15 years like I did, and you'd be fine. You'd be absolutely fine.
You'll be fine.
But the worst thing about all this, about all of this is that these commands are the official Apple knowledge base way of doing this now.
I know. It almost seems like a joke that you can't, but it's not funny. And it's actually real. It's just, I want to say this before I forget it. If you need to add something to the operating system, if you need 3 good reasons, or let's say 5 good reasons to do it, to add it, then to take something away that's existing, you should need 10 good reasons to remove something.
Yeah.
Like, don't just take it out. I don't know. That would go a long way if they had something like that there. Because they wouldn't remove these things that they think no one's using, but really is, or really are.
Almost a checks. Not almost. It is exactly a checks and balances. It is a way to justify the removal of something, even if it has to go through committee or whatever. There needs to be some sort of checks and balances to say, okay, what are the benefits? What are the detriments? Who's going to be affected? And is this going to make their life easier by removing this? I don't think the question should ever be, will their life, well, maybe it should be, will their life be made more difficult? But I think from Apple's perspective, it should be, will their life be made easier? They should always ask, will we make people's lives easier by making this change? And if the answer is no, then the change shouldn't be made.
It shouldn't be made. Don't do it. Yep.
As you mentioned a moment ago, the way to do the exact same thing, the PM set commands, the way to do that in Monterey is to go into your Apple menu, System Preferences, you click Energy Saver, and then you click Schedule. And you check a box. That's it. And yet,
That's it.
someone at Apple made the determination that our lives would be made easier by removing that functionality and saying, just go use PM set in the terminal. That makes no sense.
No, it doesn't. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And it's clearly, it to me, it's so anti-Apple because this is what the original Mac was created to take the place of DOS. I mean, it was created out of DOS's shortcomings to get rid of the command line stuff and all of that and move to graphic UI. And the original Mac too, again, didn't actually have a command line. That was in a way something that hasn't even been done to this day, where everything was an icon, everything was graphic user interface. I mean, it wasn't, if you wanted to do something, that's the way you handled it. And in a certain way, even with the iPhone and the iPad, it's kind of similar. I mean, there isn't
Yeah.
really I guess you could probably get to a command line, but I mean, there's nothing that Apple provides that's that way. And you think that Apple should be, going to things from that angle. How do we get stuff that's needed off the command line? And it's almost like they did do that, maybe with Next and when they originally came to OS 10 or turned it into OS 10, that was done, and now they're just kind of going back the other way. Like you said, maybe there's a bunch of rogue Windows developers there.
Next, the next operating system obviously was what evolved into OS 10, and
Right.
unless I'm wrong, I don't believe it was until OS 10, and I'm not including Next in saying that. From a Mac
Yeah.
perspective, I don't believe it was until OS 10 that we had a terminal, because OS 10 was the first Unix-based Mac operating system.
Right. Right.
Oh goodness! So
So that makes sense. Yeah.
I I also I also have listed some stuff that is still broken in Ventura, but I don't even want to get into that at the moment. There's stuff that changed with Big Sur that, in my opinion, is still broken, but in Apple's opinion is working as designed. And I don't even see a point in bringing it up because there's clearly no intention to change it. But
Right.
look, rant aside, I think some of the things that we brought up today kind of summarize Ventura in a nutshell. There are a couple great features. There are many more refinements. Some useful enough, more than useful enough to upgrade, like messages and reminders improvements. And unfortunately, there are also far more ports of iOS apps to fill the gaps where we had Mac apps in the past. And I think I think that's actually where some of my own frustrations come in. I don't want an iPad app. I want an app that feels like it belongs on a Mac. I want an app that feels like it
Right.
belongs on my Mac
Right.
and that
Right.
gives me the tools that I need to get the job done. And you know what? If I need a little bit more, let that app open up an avenue to me for more advanced features that allow me to take things to the next level. And that's something
Right.
that we don't get with the ports. And I'm not sure that
Yeah.
we ever will.
Nope.
So
No, I think you're totally right.
while there are a ton of great new features found within Ventura, new features that can whet the appetite of many users, I'm actually not sure that there's any one thing that I would call essential. So in my book, that makes Ventura nice to have, but certainly doesn't make Ventura a must have.
Yeah. I think when you net it all out, it's that you definitely can make a case for that. And it's kind of unfortunate. And you wonder, I don't know, you would like to talk to somebody in charge there and just see what was the thought behind this. And, I'm sure they would probably say, I don't know. We didn't think that hard about it. We
You know,
didn't,
that may very
have
well be the
time
case.
to,
That may be the case.
yeah,
It may be that we find out in 20 years when the books are written. But
right,
yeah, it would be interesting to find out what some of the as you said, what some of the justifications are for the changes that were made. Look, I said at the very beginning, this is going to be somewhat ranty, verging on the
hmm,
fringes of rantism, and I'm sure it did. I upgraded to Ventura on my MacBook Pro. I upgraded to Ventura on the Mac Studio. I don't regret upgrading, but I also don't feel like
no,
I've gained much advantage in upgrading. So if
right,
someone is on the fence at the moment about upgrading, certainly don't upgrade while we're still in this point zero part of the release
right,
cycle. Uh, as we both mentioned to someone who asked recently about upgrading to Monterey, yeah, Monterey is stable. Monterey has cleaned up its issues that came upon its initial release. It's a nice stable platform, and if you're looking to upgrade to anything, upgrade to Monterey. If you've already upgraded to Monterey, weigh those benefits of features like continuity camera and FaceTime handoff and refinements and upgrades to reminders and mail and messages. Weigh that against your own personal use case scenario. Will this actually make my life better? Ask yourself that
right,
very question we said that Apple should be asking internally. Will this upgrade make my life better because these new features will bring something to the table, that I didn't have before? If the answer is yes, cool. Do the upgrade. I don't think you're going to regret it. But if there isn't anything in that short list of 10 pole features that Apple was touting when they introduced Ventura to us earlier this summer, then hold off for a bit and see how it evolves.
yeah,
It's not unheard of for Apple to change things up partway through a cycle, to say, oh, this is going to be 13.4. Look at these things we're bringing back, or look at these new
yeah,
features that we're rolling out. And I think we're already talking about seeing some new features coming to Ventura in the point one release. So we'll just see what that brings. Like I said, at the moment, I don't feel like I need to roll back my Macs, but at the same time, I don't feel like I'm gaining much by being on Ventura.
no. I don't feel like I felt in the past where sometimes there might have been some issues with early releases, but I felt like, oh, I really like this and I really like that. I don't want to roll back. I'd hate to roll back. I don't
Right.
really feel that with this. I don't feel I really love this feature and that feature. I mean, some of it's nice and I do enjoy it. It's just that, yeah, I think overall it's not you know, like, oh my gosh, I got to have this sort of thing.
That said, we have something exciting planned for the next episode. I hope everyone can join us. But in the meantime, that's going to do it for this episode of For Mac Eyes Only. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Remember, we do love to get your letters, so if you have any comments about the show, a tip to share, a software or hardware problem with your Mac, or you would like to share your own thoughts on any happenings in the world of Apple, you can leave those comments in the show notes or drop me a line, Mike at formaceyeesonly.com. And Eric, of course, you can be reached at
Eric at for maceyesonly.com, if I can say that. Yeah. Same as usual.
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Thanks to Eric for joining me this episode. Stay subscribed, and we'll talk to you next time.